This is Island Creek Hill in Manchester and the Hoskin Cemetery. The cemetery that has been the subject of debate for the past year or so, as the Clay County Board of Education intends to move this cemetery and take this hill that it's sitting on completely down to the level of the property down below. The Hoskin Cemetery has been here about 140 years, give or take. And the Board of Education initially announced that it was going to remove these graves for the purpose of school facilities and an athletic complex. That story has changed a couple of times since then. A lot of press, a lot of attention was drawn to the plight of these individuals that are buried here, as the families started a feud with the Board of Education about preserving the cemetery. Now, little did I know that by posting a video about the facts surrounding the case and the Davy and Goliath story between the people and the Board of Education would be met with such resistance from the school board. But it was, and they changed their dialogue and attacked me personally just by pointing out the story of this cemetery. Now, what those people may or may not know is I spend a lot of time in cemeteries. I'm a cemetery volunteer. I clean veteran stones. I document a lot of cemeteries for Find a Grave website. And when this story came to be, I posted a video. I didn't realize that the Board of Education would stoop low enough to connect me to the story, but they did. I said it once and I'll say it again. The people versus a Board of Education in any small community is an uphill battle. It is very doubtful that the people will prevail here, and it's highly likely that these graves will, in fact, be moved, and this property will be taken down and leveled to match the land that surrounds it. It's just, I hate to sound negative about it, but that is probably going to be the end result here. It would take a miracle, nothing short of a miracle, and a ruling from a fair and impartial judge to recognize that this cemetery doesn't need to be moved. It can be saved and it can be preserved. But as the public started pushing back on the relocation of this cemetery, the superintendent changed his story. He said this was a sniper's nest. That's an elementary school over there, and a high school football field down below, and the high school there. This is a sniper's nest, he said. Well, Mr. Superintendent, there's a sniper's nest right over there too, on the other side of that elementary school. I wonder if you plan on taking that mountain down too. In fact, many of Clay County schools are surrounded by hillsides. And I don't see that this one is any different than the ones that surround almost every other school you've got. I could go on and complain about the illogic being used to justify the relocation of these graves. But since it's Memorial Weekend, I just thought I'd come up here and reflect upon the souls that are buried here. For example, this gentleman right here, this is a Civil War veteran. That's a sunken shield. Anytime you see that sunken shield on a stone, 99% of the time, it's a Union soldier from the Civil War. They did use the sunken shield a few times for Spanish-American War veterans as well. But most of the time, the sunken shield is an indication of a Civil War veteran. That is a grave from 1902. That is an unmarked grave. 1911. as well as some more modern granite stones. Just from where I'm standing, I see another Civil War stone back on the other side of the cemetery, and I believe this one right here is a Civil War stone as well. Nope, this one is a World War I veteran. I don't know if any of you folks have ever witnessed the relocation of a graveyard and the removal of remains, but it's pretty ruthless, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. This stone right here could be cleaned. This is a white marble stone, another sunken shield of a Civil War veteran, 24th Kentucky Infantry. So that's two Civil War guys here. There are a number of stones here that are unmarked, as well as some sunken graves that aren't marked at all. They may be under the false assumption that every grave has a stone, but if they prevail in removing this, the court should at least order that a ground scan be conducted here, because I have a feeling there are a number of other graves here that don't have stones, but they're here nonetheless. The process of moving old graves, many of these people were buried at a time when they used pine boxes or wooden boxes. Embalming procedures weren't used, but regardless, when you start digging up old graves, it's not what a lot of you think. You don't dig down and find a casket and the casket contains skeletal remains. In fact, skeletal remains disappear just like every other kind of remains. A lot of these old graves that are here, there's really nothing there. For example, this grave here from 1893. The only thing they're going to find when they get down here below this grave is they're probably going to hit a layer of dark dirt. They might possibly find some personal effects, buttons, leather from clothing articles or shoes. But other than that, it's just a guessing game. They're just basically going to move a small thin layer of dark dirt, and that's probably about the only remains that they're going to find on some of these older graves. Here's a 1912. Similar story. And that's going to be the case with almost every one of these older graves. It's just going to be a best guess when you hit some sort of remains. It's not a pretty process. It's cruel and it's cold, and it's, in the case of this cemetery, it's so unnecessary. Another thing I'd wager, right over here near the edge of the woods, you see another small stone, and there's a few others that are along the edge of the woods, but I would almost bet you money that there are graves that extend beyond the area that's mowed. I would about guarantee that there are graves beyond what appears to be the boundary. They were ready to do their work. There's thick milled plastic running around the area. It all got halted when some lawsuits got filed in courts. A federal lawsuit was tossed out by the federal government, saying it was a state government issue. So the lawsuits are still pending, or a lawsuit is still pending. But they were ready to make haste in moving this cemetery had they not been challenged. Some more thick milled plastic running over through there. There's a veteran flat granite marker of a veteran that served in both World War I and World War II. Thousands of stories. You know, the loved ones and the ancestors of the Hoskins Cemetery who are alive today, that have waged this battle with the Board of Education, are not doing it because these people are dead. They are doing it because these people lived. Here's an example of a sunken spot that is definitely a grave. There's no stone, but there's definitely a grave here. It's not flagged, but this ground needs to be scanned if in fact this project goes ahead. That right there is definitely a grave, although there's not a stone. So, got a cemetery on a hill on school property. I don't know why this was never accepted out. Most cemeteries are always accepted out of deeds. I don't know why this one wasn't. On school board property. And the board's concerned about this Island Creek Hill looming over its facilities. They totally ignore that big hill right over there that surrounds that school. In fact, there's a hill looming over this athletic complex. But I'm quite satisfied they're not worried about taking that hill down. Because you gotta watch these visitors to these cemeteries now. You gotta watch them. It's a sad story. I realize sometimes cemeteries have to be moved. I understand highways and construction projects, but this one sits on this little small knoll and it could be salvaged. There's plenty of land to work with down here. For the last several weeks, the Board of Education has kept a cable across the road down at the bottom where people can't even get up here. And since it's Memorial Weekend, they agreed to allow people to come and visit. That's a law violation in and of itself. It has been ruled on by courts throughout the years. One of the first such rulings happened in 1871 in a case called Hutchison versus Aiken in the state of Kentucky. It was an opinion of the court that stated not only is the property owner prohibited from interfering in any way with the graveyard on his property, but he is compelled to provide ingress and egress for the relatives of persons buried in that cemetery. But the Board of Education graciously allowed the people to come up here on Memorial Weekend. And it's my understanding that later on this date, around 6 o'clock, there's going to be a memorial service here. Well, now that's just really gracious of the Board of Education to violate the law and keeping people out of here. I just have a feeling that this is probably going to be the last chance that I'll get to visit here, the Hoskins Cemetery. And I have visited dozens and dozens of Clay County cemeteries over the years, documenting them, visiting them, cleaning some of them up, because that's just kind of what I do. But I get a sad feeling just standing here on this property. Again, I'd like to say the concern here is not because these people are dead. The concern is because these people lived. These were fellow Clay Countyans. These people helped build Clay County. They formed communities. Many of them lived through very hard times. Many of them fought for our freedoms. They raised families. They have ancestors that are still around today. These are people of Clay County. Who deserve our respect. In one of the documents prepared by the superintendent that he sent to the fiscal court, he calculated how many yards it is over there to that school. And he calculated how many yards it is from the cemetery down here to this football field. Good looking football field too. And he calculated the distance over there to the high school. I wonder if he calculated the distance on the other side of those hills to these facilities. Probably not. I don't know too much about the other schools in Clay County. I know there's Hacker Elementary, I believe, and Oneida Elementary, perhaps some others. But I do know that almost all of them are surrounded by hills. So the excuse of getting rid of the Hoskins Cemetery because it's here on this hill above this particular school property is a lame one. There are hills around all the schools, private properties that people hunt, squirrel hunt, turkey hunt, deer hunt. I don't think anybody's coming up here to Hoskins Cemetery to do any hunting unless they're hunting for their ancestors or hunting for their family histories. Another point, the chosen site of relocation, Manchester Memorial, I believe, is a memorial grounds where everybody has flat stones. So none of these tombstones will go with them. These will all have to be discarded, including military stones. And my suggestion is that the Friends of the Hoskins Cemetery need to lay claim to all these markers. If in fact the Board of Education prevails, they need to lay claim to these. And they need to set up a memorial to the Hoskins Cemetery somewhere here in Clay County and preserve these stones and to further honor the memory of those who are buried here. My little 2 cents worth. But there's a lot of history in these stones alone. Unique, individual, with dates and names. And they should definitely not be chunked, discarded in a landfill. Or thrown into Goose Creek. Our mother. To those of you who give of your time to watch this channel, thank you. I appreciate your gift of time. But more importantly, I appreciate your concerns and your shared beliefs and some of the ideas that are presented here. But of all the ideas and ideals and thoughts that I present on this channel, there's nothing that means any more to me than the respect for the dead and consecrated grounds of this cemetery and all others. When these people were placed here, they were placed in what we call the final resting place. Let's hope it remains just that, the final resting place of the dozens of souls buried here at Hoskins Cemetery on Island Creek Hill in Manchester.